Good evening, members, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start the meeting by giving the emergency evacuation announcement. There are no planned fire drills, so if the alarm goes off, please leave the building in an orderly fashion through the nearest fire exit. Please use the fire exit through the main doors of the hall or the fire exit in the storeroom adjacent to the stage. The fire assembly point is the island in front of the main entrance to the building. Please do not delay your evacuation to collect any belongings. Please do not return to the building until given permission to do so by council staff. Please, if you haven't already, switch off mobile phones or turn them to silent. Please note that this meeting will be live streamed. Please ensure your microphone is switched on when speaking and you speak clearly into the microphone. Members of the public and press, whilst you are, of course, entitled to film or take photographs during this meeting, can I please emphasise to you that this should only be done without disruption to the meeting and can only be done from a designated area in the public seating. Can I please therefore ask you to raise your hand clearly in the air if you wish to take photographs or film this evening? No, thank you very much. I now hand over to our chair.
Thank you, Vilma. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Linden, Councillor Mrs Shaw, Councillor Ward, Councillor Constable and Councillor Knight. Substitute members, we have Councillor Cross for Councillor Linden. Thank you. Non-members attending, Councillor Steptoe. I don't see any other non-members attending. No. Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of February 2024. Can I have those minutes noted, or are there any issues? Yeah. So noted? Yeah. Yes. Thank you, members. Declarations of interest. Any members have any declarations of interest they need to make? No? Oh, yep. Councillor Rafferty.
Great Way Queen Parish and Rochford Parish.
Okay, thank you. Any others? No? Okay. Okay, moving on then to item 6. Planning reference 23-01052/REM, land east of Ashington Road and north of Rochford Garden Way. Katie Rogers will present the report. Thank you, Katie.
Yep, thank you. So members, this application relates to land which forms part of a wider site which extends east of Ashington Road there, between Rochford Garden Way to the south and Oxford Road to the north. Phase 1 of the site, which is indicated by the light pen there, in the southwestern corner, already benefits from full planning permission, and outline planning permission has been approved for residential development within phases 2, so that's this area here, and phase 3 to the north. This application seeks approval of details of scale, appearance and landscaping, which were not considered at the outline planning stage in relation to all of phase 3 and part of phase 2. The red line on this plan indicates the areas to which this application relates. Phase 3 is this area in the north, and that part of phase 2, which we're considering, is this area here, which extends from the west along the what we call the east-west ditch, and also includes this little bit off to the south here. So this is the layout plan for phases 2 and 3, which was approved under the outline planning consent. The outline planning consent included approvals of detail relating to layout and access. This means that approval has already been given in respect of where the buildings, roads and parking spaces will be positioned within phases 2 and 3. So the plan now on screen is the layout plan that's been submitted in relation to this application for reserved matters approval. And this is consistent with the layout approved at the outline stage, save for some minor changes which are referred to in the committee report. The position of dwellings in phases 2 and 3 has already been approved, but the scale of those dwellings is now a matter for your determination. And by scale, we mean the precise width, depth, and height of each building. This layout plan shows the details of width and depth. So in terms of height, the buildings proposed would be a mix of 2, 2.5, and 3-storey. The orange-coloured buildings are 2-storey on the plan, so you can see all across the northern boundary, they're all orange-coloured, so they're 2-storey. 2.5-storey, so they're these, if I just zoom in slightly, it might make it a bit clearer. Oops. So these sort of light purple coloured ones here and here, here and here, they're 2.5-storey. And the 3-storey blocks are these blue coloured buildings. So there's one here, and another one there. There are also yellow coloured buildings, I must add, and they're single-storey, largely garages, but there are some refuse stores and cycle stores as well. The precise height of each building has been provided on the submitted elevation plans. So one of the key considerations is the acceptability of the proposal in terms of the impact on the residential amenity of occupants of existing nearby dwellings. The proposed development adjacent to the northern boundary would adjoin the rear gardens of properties on Oxford Road. Just go back to the layout plan. So this is the properties that would border existing properties on Oxford Road. And to the western boundary, along here, you've got a development which would border existing properties back onto the site on Ashington Road. The acceptability of the proposed scale of the development has been assessed in terms of the relationship that would result between the proposed dwellings and existing nearby residential properties, taking into account the proposed height of the buildings and the separation that would be achieved. Details of appearance are also for consideration in the determination of this application, and elevation plans for each building have been provided. The elevation plans show the position of proposed windows, and these details have been assessed to ensure that unreasonable loss of privacy would not result to the occupants of any existing nearby dwellings, again taking into account the siting of dwellings and the degree of separation that would result. So if I just give you sort of one example, if we just scroll across. So just to give you an example, if we look at the relationship of the dwellings proposed to these plots here, so I think this is plot 589 and 565, and the relationship with the existing nearby dwellings to the north, the elevation plan for the dwelling to this plot, so it's a semi-detached property, would feature a window at first floor level in that side elevation, which would face the northern boundary. But a condition is recommended to require that that window be obscure glazed and fixed shut above a certain height of floor level to prevent any unreasonable loss of privacy to the occupants of that dwelling to the north. The elevation plan that have been submitted for this property, for instance, shows that no windows proposed in that side elevation that would face north. We don't need any conditions. There will be no window. So we're satisfied that the relationship there would not result in unreasonable loss of privacy to the properties to the north. If I then take you just maybe further west, you can just look at maybe these properties here, and a back-to-back relationship would result between the proposed dwellings and the existing dwellings to the north. But the greater degree of separation is such that the rear-facing windows to these properties here would be not required to be obscure glazed and fixed shut by condition. Sorry, I just zoom out. So the relationship that would result between proposed and existing development along the whole of this northern boundary and this section of the western boundary, which would adjoin the development that's under consideration this evening, has been assessed in a similar way to what I've just described. And planning conditions requiring obscure glazing have been recommended where they are needed. The published report explains how impacts of overshadowing as well and privacy have been assessed, taking account of relevant policy and guidance. So I've already mentioned that appearance is a matter for consideration tonight, and in addition to where windows will be placed in buildings and whether this would impact on privacy, we are required to consider the appearance of the proposed buildings in terms of the visual impression they'd make in the street. So if I just take you to one of the street scenes that have been submitted. So this assessment needs to include looking at the building form, the architectural detailing, and external facing materials. So street scene DD, so if you look in the bottom corner, you can orientate yourself to see where you are on the site. So that's that northwestern corner. And this is street scene DD at the top. So this gives an indication of the different style of buildings that are proposed. And one of the proposed 3-story flatted blocks features to this street scene here. All of the buildings will be traditional form with pitched roofs and a mix of hipped and gable roofs. So you can see some hipped roofs here, then gable ends to this building here are proposed. Some of the buildings would feature dormer windows. You can see one just there. In terms of facing materials, different coloured bricks are proposed. So you can see a buff colour and a red brick there. Some of the buildings would feature tile hanging, and a mixture of porch details are proposed. So if we just zoom in slightly, hopefully you can then get impression. So here you can see this sort of curved detail into the porch detail, and then on the bottom, just in the bottom right hand corner, you can see some flat roof porches, and there are some with sloping roofs that extend over sort of projecting window at ground floor level. Some of the buildings would feature brick courses. I think you can just about see those just below the ground floor windows on those buildings there. So overall, it is considered that the scheme would deliver a variety in terms of buildings, form, external materials, and appropriate architectural detailing, which would result in visual interest to the street. So landscaping is the final matter for consideration. And if I just go take you back to that layout plan, this requires consideration of the proposed treatment of land, including surfacing materials to roads, boundary treatments, and soft landscaping, including the provision of street trees. And the layout here on the screen shows that we would achieve tree-lined streets with trees either proposed in the verge, so you can see some in the highway verge down here. Sometimes trees are provided sort of between parking spaces in little soft landscape spots. A planning condition is recommended to require detailed planting plans, including details of planting method. There is also an area here, little pocket park that's proposed, and that would feature a focal tree, some shrub and amenity grass planting, as well as bench seating with a path through that space. If I just zoom in slightly, so the maisonette and flatted blocks would also feature landscape communal gardens. So if I just point out one here, but there's the similar here, and to this flatted block here, and they would similarly feature bench seating, focal trees and amenity grass and other shrub planting as well. So in terms of boundary treatments, a mix of boundary treatments are proposed. So closed boarded fencing would feature between residential gardens, and you can see that's in this light blue, sort of bright light blue colour on the plan. And where garden boundaries would be visible to the street, these would be provided in a brick treatment. I might need to just zoom in slightly more to show you that. But sort of these boundaries here, if you can see where my light pen is, that would be very visible to the street, and it's proposed in a more robust sort of brick feature there. In addition, a few areas of black metal estate railing would feature. So that's these red colours here. And I'll just show you those plans. So they're the details of the different boundary treatment. That's estate railing, and that's that brick wall detailing. And there's a number of different types of closed boarded fence. So the main roads will be finished in tarmac, and the plan on screen shows the surfacing materials plan. The shared surface streets and driveways serving the communal parking courts would be paved. So that includes this area here. If you can sort of see, it's in like a lighter sort of orangey buff colour. That would be paved, as would these visitor parking bays down here. And again, these shared sort of private driveways here would all be paved, block paved, shall I say. Some of the car parking spaces would be tarmac, and some would be finished in a tarmac with a grey chip to differentiate some of those. So members are advised that there are a couple of minor changes required to the wording of the published condition 2. Firstly, reference to the tenure plan in condition 2 is not required, as the tenure of affordable housing is not a matter for consideration in this application this evening. In addition, the enclosures plan is to be noted as revision G, and the materials layout plan noted as revision J in condition 2. These plans have simply been updated for consistency to show changes to the layout as a result of the refuse stores having been amended, which is referenced in the report. So in conclusion, this application is limited in its scope and only allows consideration of the acceptability of the submitted details of scale, appearance and landscaping relating to the residential development already approved in phases 2 and 3. Details of scale, appearance and landscaping all contribute to how the character of the place is developed and how the overall development would be experienced. The clear policy objective being that good design is achieved to result in a place which is visually pleasing and functions well. The submitted details have been assessed in relation to relevant planning policy and guidance, and the recommendation is one of approval, subject to the recommended conditions, including the change to condition 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. We have 2 public speakers on this application. Mr. Clark, if you'd like to come to the microphone, please, who's speaking in support of the application. You have 5 minutes and I'll give you a warning when you come to 1 minute towards the end. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, members. As the chair stated, my name is Alex Clark and I'm the Design Technical Director at Bloor Homes. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge the planning officer's thorough and diligent review of this submission, clearly evident within their report. Their thorough assessment reflects a commitment to good planning, and that is welcomed. The reserved matter submission follows on from and accords with the outline planning permission, which included the matter of layout, amendments to which were carefully scrutinised by officers and relevant consultees and deemed acceptable by this committee in July last year, establishing a clear design framework for this submission. Access is also a matter that has been approved. This submission provides details for 316 of the 429 approved homes on this site that have reserved matters details remaining, meaning this evening you are asked to consider details of appearance, scale and landscaping. The established design principles have been adhered to, and the further feedback provided by your officer has resulted in a scheme that will deliver quality homes that are fit for purpose and will meet the needs of future residents. The amenity and privacy of existing residents will also be maintained in accordance with local policy and the Essex Design Guide. This matter has been thoroughly assessed by your officers at paragraphs 2.40 to 2.73 of the report and found to be acceptable. It should also be remembered that the location or layout of the new homes was also assessed and approved under the outline permission. Your officer's report and presentation has provided a description of the proposal and explained that it is consistent with the terms of both the outline planning permission and your adopted development plan. I want to emphasise the planning officer's recommendation for approval is not made lightly, but has been based on a thorough assessment of the proposal. And I respectfully request members of the Planning Committee to support the recommendation for the approval of the reserved matters submission here before you tonight. And I thank you for your attention and your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. You return to your seat. Thank you. The second speaker is Mrs. Austin. If you'd like to come to the microphone. I draw members' attention to, while Mrs. Austin is coming, there will be a video that will be running in the background that Mrs. Austin has brought to the committee that shows aerial footage of the site as it is. Bloor, I understand, have approved this. So, sorry? I think you asked for permission. Is that right, Mrs. Austin? The video. Sorry? Yeah, you had permission. Yeah, great. So, bear with us. We're just trying to get the video. So, if you just wait until we've got the video loaded up, and then we can. And I won't start until obviously that's running. Just talk amongst yourselves for a minute. apologies, this was working fine earlier on. Yeah, okay. You have 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you come to a minute towards the end. Thank you, Mrs. Austin.
So here we are again, forced to discuss the question of behaviour of Bloor Developments, who seem determined to do everything they can to create misery for the residents of Rochford. As if it wasn't bad enough that they created division in the community, scheming to get the building of this estate approved, they followed it up with the creation of chaos and danger on our roads with their trucks and site entrance so close to schools. It now seems they are trying to cement their role as a divider of communities through their approach to their social and affordable housing commitments. 4 years ago, Melanie English and I met with Guy Cope and Anthony Calvert from Bloor, along with Councillor Wootton and Marcus Houghton. Bloor stated that the social housing would be pepper potted through the estate. Were they lying? Honestly, the constant drip, drip, drip of Bloor Developments nonsense is like Chinese water torture of old, designed to wear us all down so we lose our resilience and willingness to fight and just roll over, constantly trying to defeat us. Bloor Developments, like all developers, has a legally binding commitment to provide social housing, or as they like to call it, affordable housing on this estate. Quite how they do this and where they put the houses isn't defined in the legal agreement, but with 220 houses to build to meet this requirement, it represents an important percentage of the total size of the estate. Rochford is a friendly and hard-working community. We don't discriminate based on social standing or wealth. We all have the same fundamental values and get along with our neighbours, and our patchwork approach to all living side by side without separation is what made this such a pleasant place to live. But Bloor want to change all that. Their intent is to destroy the community we have built, go against our values and create estates within an estate in their development, creating social segregation. In reality, they intend to hide the social and affordable housing at the back. With 110 of their quota of 220, 80% of which are social and 20% affordable or shared ownership housing in one small area, and have the majority of their expensive for sale for wealthy people homes grouped together. They are clearly creating a separation between the haves and the have-nots, and I firmly believe that separating people along these lines will do nothing but foment social unease and discrimination. It is plainly social prejudice, and the planners at RDC, by agreeing this distribution of social housing in a previous application, are adopting the same behaviour. The sensible, inclusive, tolerant and right way to proceed would have had a single and unified housing estate, a place where people can live in peace in houses they have bought or rented or had provided for them by housing associations because they need the support. How do we achieve this? Not by hiding the social away like a dirty little secret, but by spreading the social housing throughout the entirety of the estate and creating the conditions for a vibrant and prosperous community. The clue is in the name, isn't it? Social housing, not hidden away out of sight because you're poor housing. I'm not naive. I know Bloor's sole interest is profit, and they know that they can more easily sell their houses to richer people if they shove the less fortunate out of the way. And I know they will make more profit by building rows and rows of lower quality houses on the fringes where cheaper materials and lower build will be less obvious to spot. But in this already heavily divided world where a lack of cohesive community spirit, tolerance and understanding is causing so many troubles, how can it possibly be right that Bloor Developments bring that unpalatable approach to our front door? Councillors, do you really want to be associated with behaviour that approves of social prejudice? You need to act to protect our community, and you need to make sure that Bloor Developments don't create a housing estate that separates and divides people based on their discriminatory views that serve nothing other than lining their pockets with cash. Bloor seem to be in control here in Rochford, and they only have that control because they have immense financial capability, not because they are right or what they are proposing is acceptable, and not because they are a professional company that commands respect, and most definitely not because they have integrity. Please stop letting them walk all over you and the residents of Rochford. What have they done so far has all but destroyed Rochford as a peaceful, clean and happy place. Do not let them destroy the residents' self-respect and feeling of worth. The term of pepper potting, according to Wikipedia, means a form of mixed tenure development. It describes an urban planning strategy in which poorer and more affluent residents live in a mixed community through sprinkling of social housing amongst privately owned housing. This is definitely not sprinkling. A landscape includes the physical elements of geophysical defined landforms such as mountains, hills, water bodies, etc., including vegetation, human elements, including different forms of land use, buildings and structure. Therefore, my words are relevant to the landscaping part of this application, as is the flooding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Austin. Okay, ward members, do we have any ward members who wish to speak first? No? Okay. Okay, members, over to you. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of things I've written down here about flat roofs to the front elevation of the properties. I thought it was an understanding that we would not allow flat roofs to be at the front and to put top hats on instead of flat roofs. The other thing that I've noticed to the left of the planning application, close proximity to the houses, which you didn't indicate, you indicated to the other side of the right-hand side of the properties, but those on the left-hand side seem to be quite close. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 properties that seem to be that close to those properties. Perhaps you could tell me how close they are. And also, what height are the brick treatments going to be raised to? They'd have to be over 6 foot high and would have to be constructed so, not with a single brick, but have to be done with a double brick, 18-inch walls. So I just wondered what height they was going to be. And looking at the video that we've just seen, the attention, the ponds that was on that video, just exactly where are they in the site that we're now looking at, please? The attenuation ponds. There are 2 of them, and exactly where are they on this site? Thank you.
Do you want to take
If you want me
these?
to repeat them at any time, I can.
Okay, over to
Probably
you, Katie.
easier if
Yeah, okay.
I
thank you.
respond to those first. Last point first. So the ponds first on the video that was played. What I noticed was you can definitely see, I think I recall seeing these ponds in this southeast corner. They're attenuation ponds linked to the surface water drainage strategy, or will sort of, the surface water drainage strategy will drain into those attenuation ponds and then eventually discharge off site. So the whole site eventually will have
Sorry, Chairman. Sorry, the whole site, yeah.
the whole site will have a surface water drainage strategy functioning once it's all developed out. The outfalls to the attenuation ponds, these 2 in this southeast corner, and they will eventually discharge off-site. What you probably also noticed on the video is other areas of the site that have water at the moment. I think there's an area here and some areas in this, what will be the eastern parkland. And those areas, once the site is all sort of developed out and functioning, have a dual role. So they will be public amenity space, so they will be the grassed areas, and they will also be part of the flood alleviation scheme. So they're depressions in the ground, if you like, in the level, to allow for water to, pool at times of significant heavy rainfall events. And they discharge separately to the surface water drainage strategy for the site. So these areas utilise the east-west ditch, and then they will outfall off-site. And when those outfalls are operational, then there won't be that pooling that you see now.
Can I just remind the officer that a similar project was put in place over at Wickford and it was found not to be sufficient. So I'm just asking if there should be another attenuation pond somewhere on that site to take that water, because as you could see, it was quite wet.
Okay, so I think to sort of make it clear that this information is over and above what's required to determine the application tonight, because the application tonight must solely be focused on the appearance, scale and landscaping of these dwellings within these red-lined areas of the site, okay? And these areas that we're mentioning about the ponds, because we've seen a video, are outside of those red-lined areas. But, so I can provide you with more information, but it is the case that once it's not finished essentially, it's under construction. That's the flood alleviation scheme strategy. So when the outfalls are in place, they will discharge off-site the water. Okay, so on that, hopefully that's cleared that for you. Yeah, that one. The height of the brick walls. So if I just take you back to maybe I just need to zoom in a little bit more. So all of those actually have stated dimensions on. So, or they have an annotated dimension. So 1.8 metre high brick walls. Okay, so that's a boundary treatment. That's a sort of 1.8 metres is fairly standard as a boundary treatment, adjacent to highways. Some of them are slightly lower, so you've got 1.2, that metal estate railing. The point about the close proximity to houses, you might just need to help me understand that a little bit more. So on that plan, I think were you directing me to the west of the site?
Yeah, the
Over
west
here?
of it would be the lowest one at the
Here?
bottom. If you take your marker down to the next one down, that one there.
Yeah.
And also the one that you just, that's it, that one and the one at the very top. Those three properties do look rather close to the properties adjacent. So I'm just, it seems to me a lot nearer than it was the one that you pointed out to begin with on the north side.
Yeah, okay, maybe I'll just...
Thank you.
So we've got the whole of that. We've got the whole site nearly in, apart from a bit missing at the south. So what I focused on just as an example of how we've considered looking at the submitted elevation plans and where the windows are proposed and what conditions we may or may not need to protect amenity, I talked about this example here. And I think from recollection, it's in the committee report. So each and every relationship along this northern boundary and this western boundary is discussed in the committee report. I haven't got the paragraph number to hand exactly. I think that this distance here, there's a separation to the example that I mentioned first, is about 5.6 metres, okay, from that side elevation to that existing boundary. And then you've obviously got the rear garden of the boundary.
Yeah, it
within
wasn't
Oxford
those that
Road.
I was referring
No, I'm
to.
just to give you the, if we're comparing, if you like. So 5.6 here, and then over in this corner here, so if we take this far northwestern corner, I have...
Sorry, I can't take comments from the public. Okay, I think we've heard you, but I would be very grateful if you'd refrain in future. Thank you.
Okay, so this property here, just make it a bit bigger. No harm in making it a little bit bigger so everyone can see, hopefully. So the distance from the side wall, so the northern elevation of that building to that boundary there, I have noted down on my notes, it's 5 metres. Okay. I think that is hopefully somewhere also in the report. Certainly, we have in the report a discussion about the impacts of this building and the relationship with nearby properties. And if we just scroll down, I think the next one you highlighted was this one here. What I have noted down, I don't have offhand the separation distance directly west from that point there, because actually that is a sort of car park yard area to this commercial site here. So that relationship isn't quite as important to consider. What I do have is that the distance from that corner, so the southwestern corner to the southwestern corner of that, so across there, and I've got that noted down at, I think, 8.3 metres.
I was not necessarily interested in that. It was just how close it was to industrial units that the contamination might have some effect on that people in that property. That was all.
Okay, so if we're talking about concerns about impact on future residents at the site, I can clarify that contamination was a matter for the outline consent. So any requirements of land decontamination are dealt with on conditions on the outline consent. Okay, sorry, I thought you wanted precise.
Sorry, I just pointed them out because not only was it only residential, it was also impacting on the residents from the commercial site as well. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank
So
you.
hopefully, if that's dealt with that point about proximity of proposed dwellings to the western boundary, we'll leave that there. Flat roofs. So there we go. You see that? So I think what I'd pointed out and maybe mentioned as flat roofs is these sort of feature flat roof porch details.
In the roofs.
Oh, in the roof, sorry,
Yeah,
these dormers.
not low level in the roofs.
Yeah,
I noticed that they have got flat roofs on the previous properties and that was okay.
Yeah.
But I do think that we need to make some sort of design feature across the site so that they can be, you've got differential looking at it. It looks more pleasing than it does with a flat roof continuously on every roof sort of thing. That was all.
okay. So, I mean, yeah. So, sorry, I didn't realise your flat roof comment related solely to the dormers. So, yes, the dormer design is flat roofed, and supplementary planning guidance 2 in the development management that's referred to does seek generally it states that dormers should be incidental sort of features in the roof and generally have pitched roofs to the frontage. But these styles of dormers are considered incidental because you've got sufficient verge to above it, to either side and below. And we think that they look attractive to that design of property. And they've been allowed on phase 1 similarly. If your concern relates more to, or in addition to the number of them, if you look at that story height plan, the majority of dwellings don't feature those dormers. So it's certainly not the case that those flat roof style dormers will be, dot, dot, dot on every property in the street. We're talking about these ones with the light sort of purple colour. So the majority are 2-storey only without any rooms in the roof as built.
It's just that you've got a gable end to the front of the properties. So why can't we put a gable end on the roof to make it look more attractive? I see no reason why. You've already got that in the plan with a gable to the front of the property. So I don't see any reason why you can't put the similar sort of thing in the roof space, because that would make it look far more attractive than having a bland flat roof on the front of the property. We're talking about design.
Yeah.
So that's my point I'm trying to make, is that you've got gables on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 properties up there, and yet there's flat roofs on. It doesn't look right. It just doesn't look presentable. And that's design wise, that's all I'm saying. Thank you.
So clearly there is, the dormer could have been designed in lots of different ways. There could have been, some of them have no dormers. The dormer has been designed as it's been designed, and that's what's been submitted. And officers feel that this is acceptable on the number of properties that are going to feature those. Yes, it could have been designed differently. We do get these types of dormers already featuring within phase 1.
Can I just come back, Chairman? I realise that in past planning applications that we've had, we've asked for the developer to change the flat roof to a gable or to a top hat, what we call a top hat. Is there any reason why we can't ask for that from the developer?
Councillor Stanley, I actually think that putting pitch roofs on those dormers would actually be a poorer form of design than what's actually in front of you.
Well, I actually think it will be better and more in
Okay,
keeping with the front of the
and-
property.
and the
But we
second-
have our opinions. We have our opinions, and that's what we're here for,
Of
to give an
course.
opinion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, just to add that obviously this design of this development has been through urban design at Place Services at County as well.
Okay, I think on that, Councillor Stanley, we do have to defer to the professionals on this one. I hear what you're saying, but in this case, I think we do have to defer to what's actually been said. I think we can note this for future discussions with any developers, but in this case, it has been given a lot of consideration by Place Services and by our professional planning officers. And I think, as they've said, it's not that many on the site, although I have to say that if it was taken in on an individual basis, we might be thinking it a bit different. So I do concede that. But anyway, so if you're okay, we'll move on from that. Councillor Efti.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of bits, hopefully landscaping and appearance. On the northern boundary between back gardens and Oxford Road's back gardens, is there any sort of buffer or spacing between the two fences, and what trees, if any, are going to be planted along there? That's one. Any chance I can see the external finish of the 3-storey flats? Because I haven't seen that on there. And has the distribution of social housing changed since the original outline planning, the pepper potting? Main 3 questions. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. So just, we're on part of the northern boundary, okay? So along some parts, all along here, so the rear gardens of these properties do immediately abut the rear gardens of the properties existing to the north on Oxford Road, right? So there's no gap there. Obviously here there's a slightly different arrangement with some parking spaces, and there's some landscaping there, if you like, between there. So it does differ along, but there is not a consistent sort of what you call buffer, if you like. Here, this is part of the flood alleviation scheme, sort of open green space, if you like. So that essentially will act as sort of a buffer, if you like, to that section there. And then finally, the eastern part is similar to that western part I just showed. So these boundaries here would abut, yeah, immediately. So there's no separation there. And then here, there's a bit of a landscaping before those 2 parking spaces that would serve this property. And then those side sort of garden boundaries would immediately adjoin the residential boundaries to the existing properties there.
Can I just interrupt there, Katie? What is the actual boundary treatment that's where it's garden against garden?
That was going to be my next question.
Glad we're seeing on the same level.
Sorry, let's zoom out a little bit. So just to get just bring that key up. So if you can see on the key, oh, sorry. So the key, we've got a 1.8 metre high closed boarded fence and a 1.8 metre high panel fence. So there's a slight differentiation between this darker blue and the lighter blue. And if we scroll across on the plan, and then just zoom in. So you can see that that panel fence is going all the way across. Sorry, got it the wrong way around. Let's just go back to the key. Closed boarded fence, sorry, yes, you're right. So the closed boarded fence is the darker blue, and that would be a new boundary treatment along that boundary in its entirety with the existing properties. And then the lighter one is the panel fence. And so if you want to then see what those are, that closed boarded fence is this one here. Okay, so that's the boundary to the northern boundary with the existing properties. And then this 1.8 metre high panel fence is what's in between the new properties that are proposed. And then you mentioned trees as well, I think, didn't you? In terms of tree planting, did you say, on the northern boundary particularly? So there's some existing trees sort of indicated, but these are the new tree planting. So there aren't proposed tree planting within those residential gardens here. There are some here, so they're just off the northern boundary, if you like. So not within the terms of this application this evening, because these trees, I think, fall into the planting within the open space, okay, which was actually phase one. And then here you do have some sporadic new tree planting in these gardens, here and here and here, here and here on the western boundary. Okay, make that clear what's proposed.
And that's normal 5 years where they've got to keep them up.
Oh, it'll be subject to the standard condition, yeah, in terms of replacement if they die or, you know.
But it doesn't leave any room for the people on Oxford Road to repair their fence because it's right up. Fences can be abutting each other. Is that correct? If they need to repair it, or they have to take it down to repaint it.
If the people in Oxford Road wanted to change their boundary treatment, they have access from their own garden. But
They can't get
obviously,
round like they
what's
at the
been
moment.
developed in terms of immediately behind that will be what it is, that there is a fence proposed along that northern boundary.
Okay, thanks.
The 3-storey flatted block. So we do have elevations of every property. What I haven't taken you through this evening is every single elevation of every property, but the street scenes, this do give a flavour for the style of housing that's proposed. That is one of the elevations. So it's not, you know, there's 4 elevations, but that's one of them of the 3-storey flatted blocks.
Yeah. This is just an opinion where I've seen other developments. I say not block homes, but the ones I've seen with the 3-storey flats, they've all been grey and they've looked like tombstones, which is, as I can see, they're different here. They're a mixture of colours, so okay, they're all that should be fine.
There are a number of flatted blocks, but this particular one is this buff colour brick with some tile hanging detail. And obviously you're only looking at one elevation of that at the moment. But
Might be helpful, Katie, if you could actually point out where that particular one that you're showing on screen there is
Okay.
on the site.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what it might be useful to point out is that this here is part of what I call the central northern green space. So this is part of this sort of dip, if you like, that has, I think, already been created. And if you keep that in mind, and then that flatted block, just take you down to I need to zoom in on that a little bit more, I think. So I'll just show you I can go to the layout plan as well. But that whole street scene that you saw at the top of the screen is DD, and that is the flatted block. And then what you have is this adjacent dip, if you like, in the land level, and that's that central northern green space. Okay, so this is the flatted block. I can just show you on the layout plan. It might be a bit clearer because that's quite there. And then you did mention the distribution of affordable housing. Obviously, it's not something that we can consider this evening for this reserve matters application, but in terms of where the affordable will be positioned, they're indicated with red dots on this layout plan. They're consistent with the locations that were put forward at the outline stage.
Okay, thank you. Anyone, any more comments? No? Okay. In that case, then the recommendation is that reserved matters consent be approved subject to conditions set out on pages 6.2 to 6.8. Do I have a proposer? I'll propose from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Okay, if you could indicate clearly, please, those in favour. Okay, thank you. Those against? There are none. Abstentions? That's 6, 4 and 3 abstentions. That application is approved. Thank you, members. Okay, so now we move on to item 7. This is referred from the weekly list, and that is application 23/00469/full 365 Little Wakering Road, Little Wakering. Mike Stranks will present the report. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Chair. If we can, location planned. If you bear with us, Chairman, while we just get the plans in sequence. There you go. This application is to the site of a detached bungalow you see here indicated in the broader outline.
Sorry, can I ask you to get a bit nearer to your mic? I can't hear you very well.
Yep, I'll do it.
Thank you.
This application is to a site on the western side of Little Wakering Road, shown here in the broader outline. It's a detached bungalow, an existing detached bungalow, and it's just north of so the members can feel if they're familiar with Carpenters, just north of that junction. Little Wakering is a very long road, so to orientate yourself. The proposal is to extend the building at the rear and to the side, which we'll see plans of in a moment, and to change its use from that of residential dwelling, which is classed in planning as C3, to a 3-bedroom residential care home that is classed separately as C2, which is what's needing the planning permission, because the activity inside, the residents would receive assisted living, a degree of care provided, which is distinct from the everyday use of the dwelling house at the current time. The applicant also owns the adjoining care home to the north, shown there as Abbeyfield House, but I think is now known as Little Wakering House, which is operated as a 10-bedroomed assisted living residence for people with learning difficulties and mental health needs. If we could jump to the existing plans. Members will see from the representations there's been concern about the extension. This is the bungalow as it was. And then if we can jump to Plan 3, please. That bungalow received a planning permission for extensions. That extension is across the back, some 4 metres deep or so, wrapping around the side to incorporate the attached garage that you saw on the plan earlier. Of particular note, I don't know if it's worth, if Katie, when she catches her breath, can zoom in, please. I want to point out the bedrooms. And you'll see in this application, thank you, Chairman, that's great. The bedrooms there, the change in the layout of the building, there was a lounge, I think, in the front here, but you'll see there's a bedroom formed here with an ensuite, another one in here with an ensuite, another at this point here. And they were part of the planning permission given for the extension at the back and to the side to the house as a bungalow, the bungalow earlier. And before we jump to the next plan, which is a proposed plan, if you look here that there's a kitchen, which is reasonably large, and then a study at the back, and the garage is in this part. If we could please look at the next plan. Just before we leave this just gives you a spatial comparison, comparing the built forms between them. If we could jump to the next. Why I'm labouring this point, Chairman, is because you'll see that the plan that you have before you now also incorporates the addition, because at the time this application you have tonight was submitted, that the works of the application that I've previously shown you hadn't yet commenced. They got approval, but they hadn't started work. So the applicant has overlapped to cover that with this proposal, which, if you look here, shows the same ensuite bedrooms. The lounge at the back is subdivided internally. This is the same depth and incorporates the garage to the side, as you can see, but the lounge is smaller with a bathroom, toilet facility put in there, a separate dining room. You'll see the kitchen is slightly smaller, and then there's a staff room and an office been put in where the study was in the domestic extension, and there's some cupboards put in this side here. So the differences between the approved extension and that now part of this planning application are essentially internal. All the features outside, windows, shape, heights of buildings, all remain consistent between what was approved and what is proposed for you tonight. If we might as well look at the elevations just to complete the picture. As I say, the residential use proposed includes care, and though noting the loss of the bungalow, which has, I think, occurred in the representations before you, some members of the public are concerned about the loss of a bungalow-type dwelling. Members will also appreciate that the council has a broader responsibility to provide different ranges of care, and in this case, officers are supporting the provision of care for people in needs of care. So you have competing interests. You have the need to safeguard the housing stock, to safeguard adaptable stock, to also consider the conversion of existing stock to people with differing needs. If we can jump to Plan 7, please. Members will have seen from the plan that was on the screen earlier that the extensions are domestically scaled that you more typically see with householder extensions. This is the car parking revisions to the front. Here we see the extension that forms part of the application as well as the change of use. But you'll see that the car parking provisions provide 4 spaces, one larger space here, 2 that are 5 metres deep each. Your standard is 5.5, but you can see that could be slightly increased on these. This one is 5.5, and this one in the middle here is 2.5, your minimum standard, as opposed to the 2.9 metres in width. Now, parking is an issue that I think has brought this before members tonight. The 3 bedrooms in this proposal that would result require 1 car parking space for, if you like, the residents. Each member of staff, of which the applicant tells us would be 2, would require a space each. So your standards actually require a maximum of 1 space for the 3 beds and another 2, bring a total of 3 for the staff. You'll see this applicant is providing an extra space. That's above the maximum that your standards require. Now, I've done an analysis also for the building next door because that seems to be relevant to the representations that are being made. It's not before you to reconsider that neighbouring site, but I think you'll see from the paperwork and the representations in the report, there are car parking concerns. The adjoining building off the screen up here is also compliant with your standards. It's got 10 bed spaces requiring 3.3 car parking spaces, and the maximum of 3.3, I might say. And the staff is supposedly 2 full-time and 1 full-time from the previous planning history on the site. So it would require between 6 and 7 spaces, actually 6.3, but you have to round up to 7, but that's a maximum. So what this scheme actually does, even though you're being asked to treat them as separately, as they're operated by the same occupier, there is a slightly academic shortfall of 1 space on this site, but there's a surplus of 1 space on this site. So if they do end up being run together, what in my view has happened is the applicant could actually help resolve that slight shortfall on their site by keeping the one on this. And this is why officers haven't asked the applicant to reduce 1 space to achieve the maximum, because this site is over-providing. The other representations made have been about noise and disturbance, particularly from the experience of the adjoining more intense use of 10 units on there. That's a far more difficult thing to measure, given that the representations, it's double-sided. You've got the experience of this kind of use, which members of the public have written in about, and then you've got the difficulty, well, that isn't anything to do with this because this hasn't happened yet. So you'll see that it's very difficult to control noise. If this had been a semi-detached building, we might have been recommending you to have insulation and features like that that might help. It's generally down to the management of the site. There's all sorts of management regimes, clinical care commission, people like that, and licenses. It's very difficult for planning to regulate the sort of the noises and screams from people with disabilities who are perhaps frustrated and things like that, particularly in the summer, perhaps when windows are open, both for the residents next door as well as the people inside. So noise is a difficult one, and that is very difficult to measure in a realistic way. We can talk all day about the size and numbers of car parking spaces because there's mathematical formulas. It's either compliant or not. But it's a subjective judgment about the noise and activities that you're being asked to consider tonight. Now, you'll see from the report that officers feel that on balance, with the shift changes reported to be every 12 hours, 8 in the morning and 8 in the evening, that's at least in the morning consistent with a lot of everyday working patterns. We can't really do anything about the discussions that have occurred where, say, people in the kitchens at night or in later hours in the evening have been talking. That's really a staff management thing. There isn't a physical planning solution to that. So the recommendation, therefore, Chairman, is approval subject to the conditions, as you see, set out in the report.
Thank you, Mike. We have two speakers on this report. Mr. Smith is speaking in support of the application. Mr. Smith, could you come to the chair? You have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you're 1 minute from the end. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Paul Smith. I represent the applicant. We're a care home operator. We are rated good by CQC and excellent by Essex County Council. The purpose of this application is to seek the change of use, as has been explained. The principle of development has been accepted in policy terms, and Council's core strategy states that new developments must contain a mix of dwelling types to ensure that they cater for people within the community, whatever their housing needs. I'll just touch on the issues of noise. The lack of noise control has been raised as a matter of concern. We also know that comments received relate to the neighbouring property, which we obviously run. Over the years, we have had very few complaints. We have had complaints, of course. We always try to deal with them as quickly and as best we can. Sometimes it's very difficult to control people with disabilities because often they cry out in frustration. But we do try and jump on those complaints as soon as we can. I don't consider that we are bad neighbours. In terms of parking, obviously, as has been pointed out, we're providing 4 spaces, which meets with current standards. But I really wanted to sort of push on and talk about need. Members will be aware there is a chronic shortage of provision for people with learning difficulties, both locally and nationally. And hopefully it's the responsibility of the council and the development committee to ensure that all members of the community, including those with disabilities, are considered when determining applications. As a society, we have a duty to ensure that the most vulnerable members of our community, people who often do not have a voice, who are overlooked and discriminated against, are given an equal opportunity. I mean, this week, local councillors have pointed out on social media the shortage of provision for people with disabilities in Essex. Hopefully we have an opportunity to improve that situation. But I'd like to also talk to you about a case. We have been talking to people. We have a waiting list for our home because of the shortage. We're talking to one family. She's a single parent to a 28-year-old man with epilepsy and autism. She's looked after him for 28 years without help. She's reached the stage where she can no longer care for him at home. and she's worried that she will not be able to find a place for him locally. She lives in Wakery, and he will have to live out of the area, and she will then find it difficult to visit him because she doesn't have her own transport. She wants her son to live in this property. He's a part of the community that you represent, and you've got the opportunity to provide him with somewhere to live and make his family's life a little easier. To conclude, the scheme delivers a number of distinct benefits. It provides housing specifically tailored for people with learning disabilities. Its inclusionary approach aims to address the critical need within the community by offering safe, accessible and supportive housing options, catered to the unique requirements of individuals by incorporating inclusive design principles and specialised amenities such as furniture. The development will ensure that these residents can enjoy a high quality of life, fostering greater independence and empowerment. The provision of specialist housing not only promotes social inclusion, but also demonstrates the commitment to creating a truly inclusive and diverse community for everyone. And this development is supported by planning policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. If you'd like to return to your chair, thank you. And the other speaker we have is Mr. Pearce, who is speaking in objection of the application. Mr. Pearce, if you'd like to come to the microphone. As everyone else, you'll have 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you get to 1 minute before the end. Thank you.
My leg. Thank you for giving me the time to speak. I'm Ken Pearce, as you've just said. I'm a neighbour of the existing institution next door to us at 371. I'm speaking on behalf of Peter Waller, who's here, and also 9 other residents who live surrounding the property. We want to object to the planning application on a number of points relating to DM1 and the National Planning Policy Framework, and I'll refer to the Development Committee's report as I go along. On page 3 of the report, the NPPF seeks to create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible, and which promote health and well-being. And this is reflected in policy DM1, which seeks to ensure that new developments avoid overlooking, ensuring privacy and promoting visual amenity, and create a positive relationship with existing and nearby buildings. This has not been the case for the existing adjoining property, as this now overlooks and has retrospectively contravened the planning consent given, and has by no means created a positive relationship with nearby buildings. Whilst it is not relevant to the planning application you're looking at now, number 365, we note that the applicant has referred to Little Wakering House as supporting evidence for the application that their activities have not disturbed or caused nuisance to surrounding properties. We therefore submit that reference to Little Wakering House is legitimate for us too, as it provides evidence of the actual working relationship with its environment and its neighbours. In particular, we draw your attention to the statement, it seeks to create places that are safe and which promote health and well-being. The existing C2 usage at Little Wakering House has demonstrated that the C2 environment in this residential area has been anything but safe and far from promoting health and well-being. Essex Police can confirm through a Freedom of Information request that for the period of the 12 months of the 15th of November 2023, a total of 16 incidents have been attended by officers and were recorded under the following incident description types: assault, ABH, assault, common or ABH, to assist other agencies, disturbance, information and mental health incidents. We had another incident only yesterday where loud screams were heard upsetting and frightening the neighbours, followed by 2 unmarked police cars attending at breakneck speed and officers hurriedly going into Little Wakering House. We have no record of the times that ambulance and paramedics have been on site, but I can assure you this is a very common occurrence. We also note that no classification of the type of residents that will be housed at 365 has been seen. And this is extremely important because the classification changed many times at Little Wakering House. Whilst this additional C2 development appears small, it will increase disturbances by more than 20%. And we conclude that this does not comply with the objectives of DM1. It's not a positive contribution to the built environment. We also would like to relate to comments referring to the noise disruption and changeovers and the proposal stating that 2 members of staff will be on site at any time. Their own website promises a 2-to-1 staffing ratio. There are 3 residents there, which is going to require 3 staff. They have also stated that there's only 10 bedrooms at Little Waping House. On their own website, there are 13. A 2-to-1 staff ratio there gives you 7 staff, plus any management and catering staff at Little Waping House. So I think you'll find that the parking arrangements they have are probably unsuitable. We can tell you from first-hand experience that Little Waping Road is regularly disrupted with staff movements during the day and not just 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Again, not in line with DM1. On page 6, under the flood risk heading, sustainable drainage systems were all to be provided. Development has been underway at the property since October 23, so there's been plenty of time to deliver such features, but none of the recommendations of the flood risk officer from Essex County Council have been acted upon, and no conditions applied to ensure that these are completed. Significantly, the flood risk assessment does not report any surface water or other sources of flooding, and the office has not referred you to the policy guidance DM1 referencing South Essex Surface Water Management Plan 2012. This refers to ROC 9, which is Great Stroke Little Wakering, and the sewer capacity in Little Wakering Road, and DG5 incidents in the area and the sewage pumping station in Kimberley Road. Flooding often occurs when there is just a medium rainfall. Under this development, it will add additional toilets, sinks and showers in each of the 3 bedrooms and kitchens to cater for 5 people and a full car dropped curb. And as we understand it, Anglian Water are against any further development of the area due to the pump capacity issues based on the existing shortlisted critical drainage areas. So in summary, this plan increases sewage and surface water flood risk, which is listed as a critical drainage area. Whilst it's only very small, it is an increase and should be noted, we believe, to be rejected. Page 10, and has already been noticed, the National Planning Practice Guidance says that you need to count housing provided for older people, including residential institutions, as Class 2. We would contest that there is already an overdevelopment of C2 use within this small residential area. We have Barling Lodge, which is 47 residents, which is about to reopen. Little Wakering House has 13 residents, it's on their own website, they've got 13 bedrooms, and adding another 3 to 365 Little Wakering Road, we believe is overdevelopment in this very small residential area. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pearce. If you'd like to go back to your seat.
Thank you. Rachel Colour.
Visiting members, I believe Councillor Steptoe, you wish to speak. If you'd like to come to the microphone. I won't bother telling you about the 5 minutes, you know about that.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I start and the officer loads up my photographs, I do need to declare a few interests in this particular situation. As Essex County Councillor, I'm also Barling Parish Councillor, and I also live in the village itself.
Okay, thank you. Noted.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, if you can go back a couple of photographs there. I wanted to use that one last. Okay, thank you. Okay, my concerns and the reason I've called this in are around the parking issues and the problems with parking along Little Wakering Road. You can see I've just taken this picture from my car here. The building in question is about halfway along where that row of parked cars are. Now, this was taken on around 12 o'clock on Monday. I can imagine how difficult it is for residents to then park at a weekend with all of the visitors, etc., that will then come to the facilities there. That's just would take into account residents have left. The distance along there, from one end of the row of cars and into the far distance, I worked out to being, according to my car, about a third of a mile. Okay, so you can see the distance. If you can move to the next photograph for me, please. That again has taken roughly adjacent to where the development site is, looking towards the end of the parking space. So you can see there's very few gaps in between those vehicles there. and it is a bus route, and there is a bus stop just along there, a little way along there. If a bus or a high-sided vehicle comes along there, you've got no chance you'll be able to pass. Okay, if you go to the next photograph, please. Okay, this is the adjacent property that has been referred to, and the parking facilities within Little Wakering House itself. The property that is part of the application is just onto the left of the picture. You can just vaguely see the scaffolding at the front of the gable end there. The parking there is always been a problem for visitors and staff. The amount of parking going back to the original planning application there was never quite met what was originally put in the plans. And on top of that, you can see just above my wing mirror there, you can see where the bins now live on the grass verge outside, because there's no room in the car park to actually be able to put the bins. They are the large 110 capacity Euro bins, not the small wheelie bins that most properties have. So you can see that is, again, at the same time, on a Monday, 12 o'clock, staff, what have you. So you can imagine what that's like at a weekend with visitors on top of that. The other issue that I have with the property itself, in the parking provided at the front there has been no mention in the application that directly underneath the grass verge, where the entrance there is a culvert that runs. It's the main drainage culvert that runs right from all the fields along there. And then if you look at your drawing on the back of your pack here, you can see that it runs along the front of the property, across the road, and into the seawall at the top there. Okay, so you can see how close the seawall actually is. There seems to be no provision to making sure that if you're putting in a drop curb to that adjacent property, that culvert is then strengthened. It is the main culvert. So they're my main concerns to the situation. I don't believe that there is sufficient parking in terms of parking for visitors and for staff. As you've heard the previous speaker speak, there has been a considerable number of other problems around noise and the police coming into the property. Whilst it's important to make sure that we do provide these facilities for those that are in need within our community. These facilities need to fit in to the community as well. Little Wakering is a small village. It's only very, very small. It's only got the one road, other than another bit of road called Kimberley Road. So it has to fit in with that community. The roads themselves are very narrow. If you can go back to one of my pictures, please, previous pictures, you can see the road itself is not that wide. It is minimum standard in terms of the width of the road, and it is the main road through the village. There isn't another road through the village that carries that amount of thing. So, members, I would ask you, if you would, to give a lot of consideration to the knock-on effects that this development will give to the life and the way it fits into the village itself, which I think is something that's important. I'm 90% sure that most villagers will say, yes, we do need those types of facilities, but it must fit into the community. And I don't believe that this extra fits into the community. Thank you, members. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Steptoe. Board members?
Thank you, Chairman. This is a really difficult decision because we do need more of these types of residences. As Councillor Steptoe says, it's got to be in the right place. It's got to have the right sort of parking. And it just doesn't, in my opinion, it just doesn't seem to have the right sort of parking. It says 2-to-1 care on their website, and they're only letting 3 spaces there for staff. They haven't put anything about the kitchen staff, auxiliary staff. If it had more parking spaces, maybe I think better of this, but I know it falls within what we're supposed to grant it on parking spaces, but I do believe that there's going to be more parking than what's actually said on this application. So I cannot support this application at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rafferty. Councillor Myers?
Thank you, Chairman. There's not really much more I could add after the eloquent speeches of Steptoe and Councillor Eftibar to the side of me, but I do echo the same sentiments, having driven up and down that road numerous times. In the report, it talks about the large hard standing at the front. I stood on it, and there was a skip and a van on it, and that took up nearly all of the front of the space. The road is always constantly blocked on one side, but I'm hearing about the amount of police reports, people going backwards and forwards. I think that the building Little Wakering House that is already there is more than sufficient for Little Wakering to provide in its portion of looking after other people. And I would have to agree with my fellow ward councillor that I would have to oppose this proposition.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. Mike, do you want to come back now or summarise at the end?
Chair, I think it's all been matters of opinion. I don't think, with all due respect, there's anything for me to come back on. I think I made the presentation clear. What's come out of the discussion is some different numbers. The analysis I've given you is from what's in the application and also what I gleaned from the history as a adjoining property next door. But I see in the adjoining property next door that it was, I think, approved for 8, but there was no limit on numbers. And I saw an application for a fire escape that included 10. It's news tonight that there's sort of 13 units in there. Now, as members are saying, if there's certain ratios, and I did allude to other regimes that license and cause the ratios of staff, that has skewed the numbers I've given you. Now, it's down to whether you go by the content of the planning applications, which I've given, which on that academic exercise show that both sites are actually compliant, or whether you give weight to what you've heard from other people who say, no, there's far more staff, and that's why they're deemed inadequate on site. But I can't verify for you what you've heard from the licensing things. So I'm in some difficulty other than just really reciting what I said before, which comes from the planning application. But there's clearly different sources of information and different points of view. I think it's in members' gift as to what you finally decide and what you choose to give weight to. One advantage you have here is, unlike if this had been a solo application yet to be up and running, you've got an experience from the site next door. So you've got a living, breathing example, as if this was retrospective in a small way. So it leaves less to the imagination, but how you weigh all that up, as I say, is subjective, and that's members' role. Hopefully the advice you've had from the report and from myself gives you some guidance, which is what we're here for. But you do have now the difficulty of weighing up all those different of what you've heard.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Lorne.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not that familiar with the area. I do know it, obviously, but I'm not that familiar because I don't live that way. And I've listened to everything, but I've had also in my own past experiences of similar facts, if you know what I mean. I think there is a need for these calls, but I think it has to be proportional. And it has to be proportional in terms of what's accommodation, the area, the residency and so on. I watched with interest, and of course it's been said since about parking, but there was no accountability for the attendances of like carers turning up, emergency services, etc., etc. That all is an add-on to that. And then I look at the pictures that are shown, and I've listened to what's been said, and I'm now concerned about if I dare use the word, a sleepy little village that's been impacted by more and more of accommodation that's putting stress on the residency, if you follow what I mean. And I'm a bit concerned about how it'll have an impact on it. It seems to me an overdevelopment, really, in its own way, because I just think it's too much. They've already got one home there, and I'll applaud that, but it's too much. There's been examples of the calls, of the police calls,
to the existing home, and it's only going to extend by adding another building. I just think it's going to increase it. I'm very concerned about it, and I'm very in support of all these organisations. But I just think in the circumstances where it is, I think it's an overdevelopment, and I think there is a parking issue. That's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawn. Councillor Stanley, did you indicate?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I do applaud this action that the applicant wants to put in, although, and as it's been rightly looked at, and we can see by the amount of vehicles that are on the road, if an ambulance was to call there due to a fire, then we get the fire brigade. We've also got the police there. How on earth are they going to get to the premises? Either one of them would be very difficult to look at, just the same. We've also, I know we've already mentioned about the parking spaces, but the welfare people that come from the welfare offices, we've got nurses that will actually come into the property, doctors, and residents. That's residents of the people that are there in the first place. You know, there is just insufficient parking. We can see there's insufficient parking there to start with. And even that's on one of the properties. So there is insufficient parking. Plus the fact, if you've got a disabled person that wants to park there, or two disabled people, there isn't the parking space isn't wide enough for them. So, and as my colleague has just said, overdevelopment, I do consider there's very little amenity space there for the staff in any case, for them to take a break, or should they need to take a break. So with that in mind, I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask a question? It's to do with the parking. Is there a difference in the standards or the need for parking from normal residential property to change of use to the C2 use? Are they the same standards?
Yep, thank you, Chairman. No, Chair, the standards are slightly different. As a bungalow, this existing building, even with the extension, would require 2 spaces. The County Highway Authority normally say the extra quarter of a space per dwelling can be accommodated curbside. You see in the scheme we had earlier, where you get brand new build laying out an estate, then they feature generally parallel visitor spaces that Katie alluded to in the different surfacing. But with an existing street like this, the County Highway Authority wouldn't require the extra quarter of a space. If an applicant wants to provide it, they wouldn't object. But the expectation is that as a domestic residence, 2 spaces are provided. Now, the existing layout here, forget the proposal, has got like this sort of shrub bed, and they've got a crossing in here and another one in there, so, and a garage. Whether the garage is big enough to park, but it might park a small vehicle. So it's already got 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, because the front garden is predominantly hard surfaced. So you can see that the residential use of this, they've already tried to make it as easy as possible to pull in and out. And plus, when you put crossings in, it tends to do away with curb parking, as we know. While I'm in, Chairman, there is I think what's meant to be a disabled space here. Apologies if I'm not using quite the right terminology, but this is an oversized space, as you'd normally see. I presume for vehicles to allow people with impaired to be able to get help or assistance to get in and out, or to go to day centres, things like this. So this is the larger car parking space. It's 5.5 metres deep, I think, by 3.9 wide. So in this scheme before you, I can't speak because we're not dealing with the other one, but in this scheme, they have made provision for anybody disabled to be able to park and to be able to manoeuvre about the vehicle.
Thank you, Mike. Any other speakers? Councillor Miles, I think you're first.
Thank you, Chairman. More of a technical question more than anything else. On the initial planning application, the bungalow was under 250 square metres. so it didn't need a flood risk. On page 7.1.8, item 39, it states the proposal description includes reference to an extension, but this is already under construction as a site being granted planning permission, albeit for use as a single dwelling house. The proposal now seeks to incorporate extension into the proposed use for C2. The extension would not exceed 250 square metres. So my question is, if it then became it did have a change of use, would not the whole footprint of the building come into the calculation for 250 metres as opposed to just the extension?
Chairman, members have got me at some disadvantage on the details. As you may know, I came late to this, but I think the difference is there's a lower standard for householder extensions. Usually the flood risk assessments, because the household is already there, they look to make things like plugs and sockets a certain distance from the floor and things like that in event of inundation. It's all let down because probably the power comes in underground anyway, but that's another story. It's different where you're providing new build and then you're given a clean slate, of which I think the expectation is greater. But I haven't got figures, unfortunately, on the size of how big it is now and how big it will be, other than what the case officer has put into the report. If members think that's different, I'm sorry, I can't verify that.
Can I just point out that 7.18, paragraph 42, does actually state the applicant has submitted a site-specific flood risk assessment, and I would suggest that if that is site-specific, then that covers what your question is about.
No, I just wondered, because it actually mentions the extension as being under 250 metres, but that's when it's a dwelling house, which is in a vulnerable category, apparently. But the care home also falls into vulnerable. And if it's then going to change use, my question was, do we just add the size of the extension to the existing footprint to see whether it comes under over 250 metres and therefore would need a flood risk assessment?
Well, it does say that they have actually submitted a site-specific flood assessment, so I think that might be covered. Mike?
Chair, it may either add to the problem or might help members solve it. I can't help you, as I said, with the technical side of it, but what usually happens, because this is an existing area, the emergency planning officer and the emergency services have to evacuate residents in the vicinity. So whilst extra persons mean perhaps extra trips in a raft or some kind of water vehicle or something, and the risk of falling down manholes with the lids blown off and all those practicalities, they are less concerned for evacuation where you've got an existing settlement. Okay, so clearly they wouldn't want to add to the number of households. So if it was a vacant site and they said, oh, we want to build one or two extra, then they'd say the one or two extra is not acceptable. But where you have an existing dwelling like this and where you're changing its use and where they've got to go to a site next door with people with special needs, they'll have evacuation plans and arrangements, and all they would actually be doing is adding 3 extra persons to that work. So it then rests, I think, as to should the building or the extension be inundated, what can you do to try and help the mitigation afterwards, after the flood abates? And that's where you get all these things like certain water resistant materials, or you bring the electrics in a certain level instead of up that way. But I'm sorry, I can't help you with this mathematical calculation on the 250 or not. And I can't even, with the tools we got here, measure what the resultant floor area is. So I rather feel I'm letting you down, Chair.
No, I appreciate that contribution, Mike. Just to point out also 7.110, top of the page, safe access and escape routes are included where appropriate as part of the agreed emergency plan. A flood warning and emergency plan has been submitted as part of the application, which demonstrates that access and egress can be safely achieved without placing site users at risk. I think that what you're asking, Councillor Myers, is probably technical, but it seems to have been covered in the actual report from what I can see. So If you're okay with that, we'll move on for that one. Thank you. Councillor Lawson? Lawman, rather, sorry.
I was going to
Close.
correct it, Chairman. Yeah, thank you. It's just a little thing that was said by Mr. Strengths. Talking about the previous house, when you was putting the story before, you said that the previous house didn't quite have enough parking, and this house, because it's got an extra space, would help with that further parking. Did I pick that up wrong? Only because you mentioned this fourth bay being a disabled bay, if you want. But if someone parks there, let's say the cleaner, it's no longer a disabled bay, is it? You know, it can't be used for that facility. It's just a parking question, really.
Do you want to come back, Mike?
Yeah, I'll reiterate what I said. That identifying the representations we had explained the inadequacy, and I think you've been given by the speakers a different picture to that I have. What I gained from the planning application details we've got on file for next door, and I appreciate we're not talking about that as such, but they are joined as such. The academic exercise applying the parking standard of the number of bed spaces, which I understood to be 10, but you've heard tonight it might be 13. Yeah. And the 2 staff plus 2 part-time staff. So you've got what you call full-time equivalent. But if you imagine the 2 part-timers aren't there at the same time, so therefore they equate to a 3rd member of staff. So the details we have, which may be old and out of date for the adjoining property, would say there's 10 bedrooms, presumably with an occupant in each, and 3 members of staff. And I think you've heard tonight, and members have started to say that surely there's more than 3 members of staff for that adjoining unit. But on what we know, which may be out of date or even wrong, the car parking calculation for Little Wakering House would work out at 6.3 spaces, which in an ideal world you round up to 7, but your standards say they should be maximums. Yeah. So, you know, be at the far end of Foulness Island or somewhere where it doesn't see a bus to require the 7. Yeah. So the applicant, if you refused it on car parking and went into an appeal, the applicant would probably do the same calculation I have done and tell the inspector, I only need 6.3 spaces rounded up to 7. I can see with my eye that there's 6 spaces on that forecourt. You've heard tonight from many people that, you know, local feeling is it's not adequate. And members have said themselves, what if an emergency vehicle arrives and things? But this site here, which we are talking about, requires 3 by your parking standards. Now, the applicant in this case is providing 4. It perhaps matters not that ones are disabled. And I take the point in reality, if there's no other spaces, other people park in it. But generally, there is a parking space. And what I was suggesting to members is that the site shortfall on the northern site can be made up if these sites do operate sort of together, because they're in the same ownership. If somebody attending this site can't park in here, they might be tempted to park on this one. So rather than tell the applicants you're over providing, do away with the space and make it a piece of landscaping, we've kept the extra space in because it helps given the street conditions. It's not a perfect solution. But what I was saying, from the information we have for both sites, and particularly this one, there is an extra parking space over and above what your standards require. Now, members can come to a view on the adequacy from what they're hearing, but all I can give you is what's in the content of the application and what we're lucky enough to have survived from the files from the previous application. So I've applied the modern standard, and I can tell you that as a planner, and possibly the view put to an inspector by a planner representing the appellant if you refuse it, they'd probably make that same case to the inspector that they're providing between the 2 sites exactly the maximum of what would be required. But what's come up in the debate is actually a far greater need. Now, that's now difficult to quantify.
Thank you, Mike. Hang on a minute. In order, please. Councillor Mrs. Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just ask the planning officer, there's talk about having a dropped curb to allow the vehicles to get onto the property. How many on-street parking spaces will be lost having the drop curb put in?
Chairman, the existing arrangement, I won't ask for the existing plans to be put up, but round about here, there's a sort of a flower bed. It's got shrubs in it. And what you have a fairly wide crossing here and another one here and a sort of a loop round, and this is all concreted. So to get this arrangement where they're what we call independently operable, and like the existing dwelling where cars can block each other in and you have to ask family members to move, each one of these are independently operable. Now, the extent of the crossing is in this vicinity here, probably equal to 1, maybe 2 spaces in this part. So that would be the run. So if you imagine each space is 2.9 wide, that one is actually 2.5. So 2.5 and 2.9, I think that's 5.4. A car parking space in your standard is 5.5 in length. So it's 1 car parking space thereabouts, curbside, that would be lost. But I think you saw from the photographs, there's so much parking the other side of the street, people aren't likely to park there unless it's an absolute emergency, like the police or somebody.
I've got a lot of people coming back on this. We are actually doing a lot of chatting around this. Those who've already spoken, I'll come to you last, but if you could be succinct in your questions so as we don't actually go over points which we've already raised. So I will start off with Councillor Mrs. Brewer.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions was, you are indicating that there are 2 part-time staff. They will be on site most times together, because although they're part-time, one might be doing a 12 o'clock changeover, etc. So you could actually be doubling that up as I'm looking at it. Because if you're working a 10 to 2 shift and a 2 to 8 shift or whatever, you are still going to have 2 people arriving and leaving at the same time. My other point is I concur with a lot of what I've heard today. And this could be hypothetical, of course, but you keep referring to they're under the same ownership at the moment. What would be the case then if this one wasn't under the same ownership at some point, and that's extra space for the other home? We can't guarantee that. I know it's probably not planning, but it's just my point of view with putting more vehicles on the street or losing out if that then is taken under different ownership at any time. Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, Chairman, I think I've started to confuse everybody by straying into the adjoining history. The other site, in doing a bit of research coming to this meeting, that's the one that had the 2 part-time posts, full-time equivalent posts that I was talking about. And it's led us to start talking about the 2 together, which perhaps to a point is wrong. This application that's before you tonight, the application details, the applicant has provided that there would be 3 persons as, if you like, residents with 2 full-time members of staff. Okay, so there isn't a part-time job carer associated in the application particulars. Whether in reality they would become a job share, but you're being asked by the applicant to consider that the persons employed on this site, if you like, as staff, would be 2 full-time or perhaps 2 full-time equivalent. The words about the part-timers has come in from us starting to look at the cross sort of fertilisation with the 2 sites. Now, the point is well made about if for some reason they were to be sold or run separately, then no doubt you would lose the opportunity for this site to help the adjoining site. Currently, as long as they stayed in the ownership, I'm suggesting to you that could be the case. If this was sold off separately, it would have more than enough car parking for the use that's before you tonight. It's got a surplus of 1 space. You could make a point. I mean, it's said that there was a bus service along here. That would normally, under highways, they would say that reduces the need to have the maximum standard. So the maximum for this site is 3 spaces. You've got a slightly undersized one in width, and these are 0.5 metre short in depth, but the 0.5 metre in depth can be made up. And if you took out this arrangement here, you could easily get 3 spaces in, or if you took out that one, then all these others would comply. So this scheme itself, the one before you tonight for a decision, is more than fully compliant for the car parking standard that you operate. The idea of this helping the adjoining site has come in because of the representations made about the 2 sites being used together. But to be absolutely clear, if this was sold off separately and run completely different, this would have more than enough parking in accordance with your standard.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chairman. We're getting hung up on detail here. I think if we were to purely look at the material planning considerations for this application, we'd have to agree with the officer's decision. But I have a fundamental problem with the reclassification of the property in the first place. I think the quality of care and the existing care home is obvious, and I'm sure they provide an extremely valuable service, much needed in the area. But this is the right facility in the wrong place. And to me, it's totally unfair on the existing residents in the area to have this expansion by stealth, almost, by reclassifying a bungalow as effectively a care home. So if an alternative site could be found for what is no doubt an excellent facility, that would be the ideal solution. But to expand the site by stealth, by reclassification, I think, that's one of the things we're here to decide, whether the reclassification is valid, and I can't support that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Stan, you have the last word.
Thank you, Chairman. It looks like it's just been said for me. I was just going to point out the classification is that as it was a bungalow to start with, and it was quite adequate enough for a family of 4 to have 2 cars in that vicinity, in that property. But because it's now considered to be a different classification, it's gone beyond its viable means. And I do think that Councillor Cross has exactly explained the situation that I was going to mention as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanley. I have a couple of questions, really. I can't find anything. One of the things that the residents actually put in the speech he brought was about boundary treatment because of overlooking, etc. I can't find anything in the report anywhere about boundary treatment. Am I right?
You're right, Chair. From what I've gleaned from reading somewhere, I may not have the most accurate picture on it, but I think there's some history about an obscure glazed window in the unit next door. And for some reason that's become clear glazed, but I can't give you an update as to whether that's been pursued from enforcement or whatever. But I think some of the overlooking and the sort of undermining from that, I think, relates to this window, unless Yvonne knows better than me.
I need to be cautious what I say in a public meeting, but my recollection is that that condition has been breached for more than 10 years, and I think it's been investigated and there was nothing we could do about it. But I can double check that, but that is my recollection.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I was looking at it from the point of view, yeah, I see the overlooking being an issue, but fence. Is there a 6-foot fence around the property? I mean, it sounds to me as though this is one of the conditions that residents are concerned about.
Chair, I haven't seen the site. I don't know what the fencing conditions are.
I wonder if we could just put a condition on there pending site inspection as to the height of the fence and it, because of the nature of the application, whether it should be maximum height. The other thing I was going to say is that I'm listening to everything that everyone said this evening. I think the officers have been very clear in their presentation. There are concerns from residents and obviously from members. There does seem in a lot of it to be, in the comments that are made, overlapping. And it's gone outside of the planning issue that we are considering here. There's clearly a licensing issue. And I think that that's something that maybe ward councillors can take away and maybe look at. But as far as the actual planning application goes, when you're looking at the proposed parking areas, we are losing 1 on-street parking place and gaining 2 off-street. So when it comes to parking, this is actually improving the parking situation around there. Hang on. From what I'm seeing. Now, I'm not suggesting that there isn't a serious parking problem around there. There obviously is. But that, to me, looks like, when you consider it in the cold light of day, where we read this report that's before us here, it's not actually making the situation worse. Now, I think that that's something that we can argue about all night, but that is my particular opinion. I'm going to allow one more comeback, Councillor Myers, and then I will go to the vote. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just come back on the parking. I appreciate the fact we're going to have 2 members of full-time staff doing 12-hour shifts. But at 8 a.m, there's going to be 4 cars on site, which probably isn't going to be too much of a problem on a non-school day. And at 8 p.m, when there may well be visitors in the building as well, you're still going to have 4 cars on site, but they've got 2 that are already there, and the 2 people taking over from them have just turned up.
Yeah, playing devil's advocate, I sort of hear that, and I think, well, there are 4 parking spaces on site. So I don't know. I mean, we could argue this all night, but I think what you have to bear in mind, members, is that we are looking at the planning application here, which we have to consider in the light of planning law and planning policy. I think the decision has been put to us, the recommendation has been put to us succinctly by our officers, and thank them for the thoroughness on that. So I will now be looking for, recommendation is the application be approved subject to conditions set out on pages 7.1.14 to 7.1.15 of the report, and as revised on the addendum. I shall move for acceptance from the chair. Do I have a seconder?
That'd be me again.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mrs. Wilson. Okay, so we go to the vote. Those in favour, please indicate. Those against, please indicate. And those abstentions, please. Okay. Okay, so I have 1 for, 6 against, and 1 abstention. Therefore, sorry,
2, sorry.
two.
Didn't see your hand there.
Two abstentions. So now we need then to firm up on reasons for refusal. So can I have proposals for refusal, please? Councillor Rafferty.
Overdevelopment.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Overdevelopment.
Mike, will that stand up?
Forgive me, Chairman, no. What overdevelopment normally means, you like putting something too big on the plot you have. So like inadequate garden areas, plot widths, things like this, inadequate parking, you know. I think where the overdevelopment from the debate, without hopefully not leading members, I think there was concerns about the further intensification of this kind of use.
So the overdevelopment of that use.
Yeah,
C2.
in this location.
Yeah.
So that's more of an intensification given what's next door. Because as members have said, it wouldn't necessarily always be in the same ownership. You just don't know. But I think when you're perhaps in your mind talking of a term overdevelopment, I would suggest probably what you're thinking is actually the problems associated with the intensification of this type of C2 use in this location. And that might be a better way to go, particularly where it's subjective. You've heard so many differing opinions. Whereas if you're trying to settle on things that are measurable, the measurements that you've been given, officers have assessed, they stand up. But where you've got the degree of fit that is subjective, which is over and above all the measurable stuff, I think that's where this debate, if you don't mind me saying, has gone. So I think if you're looking at intensification uses of the type of use, that has more legs than the word overdevelopment. Overdevelopment frightens me, intensification doesn't.
So can I change that to intensification of C2 use in that specific area of Little Wakeman Road?
Because there's already one next door.
Because there's already one next door.
Does anyone want to add any more to that? Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just concerned about the size of rooms that the development is holding at the moment. Would that be, when we've got the dining room or the lounge or whatever it is, would that be large enough for that amount of people to sit in that lounge?
Mike.
Or dining room or whatever it is? I mean, it looks, I'm only just saying, it looks a bit tight. But It might not be. I don't know. I don't know what size of rooms you have to have for these homes. I've no idea.
Chairman, neither do I. You have standards where new dwellings are proposed, and those standards talk about bedroom size, they talk about gross building footprint, and they talk about storage space. Not even the room sizes for dwellings speak about how big a dining room or lounge should be or anything like that. Now, it's been said that there are other licensing regimes that also go on when you're providing care. And it may be that they say how big the ensuite should be for each room, how big the lounge should be in the dining room. But that's not done here. You would think that as somebody in that work has made the application, they've submitted a layout and a design that would be compliant to whatever license regime outside of planning that they have to work to. But I can't tell you if the lounge or the dining room is big enough. There's not even a standard with these things as to how much gross floor space there should be for this kind of care provision, not in planning. If that was a proposed bungalow, I could tell you what the gross should be and what the bedroom sizes should be. But even in that, I wouldn't be able to tell you how big the lounge should be.
Basically, we can't use that as a refusal.
Not something so measurable and detailed, no.
Thank you. Councillor Lawman.
Thank you. Something that's been bothering me, and I've been really harping on it really, is the impact on the environmental amenity of the residents. I just looked something up, as I would. Residential amenity covers multiple potential effects on the development, including noise, dust, daylight, vibration, shadow, flicker, outlook, and visual amenity. This includes noise and we're getting on now about public amenity, the public disturbance. So I'm of opinion that there is an impact here on the residential amenity, and I think that would be good grounds to refuse in this case because of what we've been told from existing information. I know we're talking about next door, but it's going to be the same company, and so I feel that we should be looking at residential amenities.
If I hear right on what I have heard, the intensification of C3 would cover that. Am I right?
Short answer, no. As you know, Chairman, I can do things very little concisely. The intensification, to my mind, would lead you towards what you've heard and the representations you've had on the degree of disturbance and activity. You've heard about police cars and ambulances, you've heard about the management issues on the site, and I think the words ill-fitting have been used, something along those lines. That, to my mind, is the flesh of the harm that you're putting to the intensification bone that you've brought out in this debate. So what you're often required to do is to explain your reasons for refusal, to demonstrate the harm. And so if it's intense, so what? I'll tell you what so what is. It's the extra noise, it's the activity. You're explaining, you've got to explain in your reason for refusal why it's unacceptable. So I think to look at the amenity concerns that you've been presented with is rightfully a concern that you could offer a defence to. I can't promise the outcome, but from what you've debated and what you've heard, you're in the territory of the harm that, you've got letters of objection that are a matter of fact on the file that explain these kind of issues, given that they're largely associated with the experience of the next door unit, which is a bigger unit, because you've got to consider something that a third in size or even a quarter in size of the one next door. So would 25%, if it's a 13-bedder, would 25% of the harm that people are saying that causes, would that be acceptable on this smaller 3-bed unit next door? That's the magnitude of your concern. So you're looking at the two together with the intensification, but as a measure, it would be 1/4 perhaps, if indeed it's 13 beds. If it's 10, it's a third.
If I may debate that with you, I think it's not a question of measure, it's a question of if, because if it affects people, then it affects people, and we can't measure that.
And what I'm suggesting is that it's been proven and it's been stated from experience that there is a disruption in that area for various reasons to do with medical needs, if you like.
Yeah.
And that's been evidenced. So what I'm suggesting is that if we increase that that availability, all we're doing is we're creating more environmental issues for those people residing there. And so I'm saying it's having an impact. It will have a bigger impact on the quality of life for those people living in that area. That's what I'm suggesting.
Members, I am aware that we are approaching 9:30, so I think we need to move this on. If we're going to go on much more, then I'm going to need to go to the vote to extend the meeting. Caroline.
Thanks. Through Chair, just to reflect on what Mike has already explained to the committee, and to try and sum up, I think, where the debate is going. It's about the cumulative use, I think, is what you're saying. So this is a separate site. It could act independently to the site next door. The site next door could close down tomorrow. But what members are saying, that it's not just anecdotal. You're seeing this on street parking. There's an accumulation of parking on site, on street already. That's been exacerbated by the comings and goings of the site next door. If this use were to be approved tonight, the cumulative C2 uses together within a residential area, which is predominantly residential, would then tip that balance that Mike was just talking about. So it's difficult. You can't, it's not a percentage. You couldn't say there's a 25% more comings and goings, but from what you are experiencing, what the local community is experiencing on site and in the surrounding area, is that additional comings and goings from vehicle trips, from the emergency services, and it's all that put together. Now, how we express that in a reason for refusal would be set around that context. So the cumulative uses, C2 uses in a predominantly residential area, the additional comings and goings on top of what's already happening, in your view, notwithstanding the four car parking spaces, is likely to give rise to a harmful impact on those surrounding neighbours through parking, through comings and goings, through noise and disturbance. It's the harm issue, the harm element that you need to be able to be succinct about. So that's the parts. We can put together the comings and the goings, the C2 use in a residential area. It's just been really clear about what that harm is, and it's about the impact on residents from that debate that I'm hearing is coming out. So I don't know, Chair, if you're happy to just adjourn for 2 minutes for officers to perhaps just try to define that harm for you and read it back to the committee, and then you can agree from there.
Yeah, okay, we'll adjourn, thank you. But I need to extend the meeting now. So the meeting has now lasted roughly 2 hours. I'd like to move a motion without notice in line with Committee Procedure Rule 9N to extend the meeting for as long as necessary in order to complete the business. I will propose from the chair, and I have a second, Councillor Stanley. Those in favour? That's unanimous, I believe. Thank you. Okay, so Councillor FD, and then we will adjourn.
Chairman, if you got, I'm looking at refuse and waste storage, and it says there's a drawing 2301 SK01. If you can got that up, or I can use the description that's actually in the paragraph.
It's on the cards, isn't it?
Yeah, because I'll read it out. Oh, okay, there. Whereabouts the waste storage is over there, but it says one, where it says one recycling and one general waste bin. But surely this is a sort of a / nursing sort of home. Surely there'd be some hazardous waste there. So is that going to be big enough to take that? Because I think that may be wrong. So I don't think the waste storage, what's proposed, is actually relevant to the site.
Mike?
Chair, you'll see with the car parking, if this were approved, located to the front, there is plenty of room here for additional bin storage. This is all currently hard surfaced. So although they've put bin provision, there is quite room for either extra containers or different size containers that can be wheeled to collection, or the contractors come and collect them. So I would say there is plenty of room for a variety of waste management alternatives in that location.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, we are going to adjourn now for a couple of minutes, and I'll call you back as soon as officers have something for us. Thank you. Together, please. You want to reconvene the meeting? Okay, thank you, members. Meeting's reconvened. Mike, can I hand over to you for the considered response?
Thank you, Chairman. Bearing in mind that officers feel that the scheme is parking compliant, okay? From what we've heard from the debate and the representations before you, we think there's a reason to sum up, which may be varied slightly in the minutes, but along these lines, if members will allow me to read it out. That is, the proposal by way of the further intensification in C2 use in the location would give rise to added disturbance detrimental to the residential amenity nearby residents or reasonably expect to enjoy, and would, if allowed, result in increased parking pressure where there is a notable reliance on on-street parking by existing residents arising from staff, servicing and attendance by emergency services detrimental to the free flow of traffic on a classified road.
Thank you, Mike. Members, are you happy with that as a reason for refusal? Yes? Okay. All right, let's take that to the vote then. So I don't think do we need to read that out again? Do we need someone to read it out again? Do we need it read out again? No? No? Okay. Proposer, please. Councillor Myers, seconder. Councillor Stanley. Okay, those in favour of reasons for refusal? Thank you, members. Those against? Abstentions? 7 for, 2 abstentions. So that is now our reason for refusal. And with that, that concludes the business for the evening. It is now 10 to 10 and this meeting is closed. Thank you, members.